fuck up. It's time to talk business. Jared Taylor, Matt Best, and Evan Hafer proudly present Blackhearted. Sponsored by BlackRifle Coffee Company and Arson Wave.
Whoa. We're not dead.
Nope, we've just been busy, you know. That's one of those things with this podcast. You got to balance your business, personal life, and podcast life. So,
and it's kind of the pace of it registers on when we have good guests to have on here.
Yeah.
So like beginning of the year when we're doing SHOT Show and stuff like that, and we have access to a ton of these people that have cool experiences, that's when we try and front load the most. But then, you know, midsummer when we're busy ramping up for the holidays and stuff like that, business-wise, things get kind of slow. But we're not going away, so we're here. It's just not going to be, it'll be a sporadic schedule pretty much.
Sporadic.
Today we've got two very special guests. We have retired United States Air Force Full Bird Colonel Pete Donnelly, who is a business partner of ours in a venture we call A15 Publishing. And then joining us with him is prior Army Ranger, author, and TV star from TV, Marty Skovlund.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I like to think I put off the Colonel vibe, though.
Yeah.
I can feel it.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with Pete. He's going to tell us his history in the Air Force, and then where it came from to start writing books.
Okay.
He's writing over there right now. It's fucking weird. Like, you know that we have more paper here. You don't have to use Holiday Inn Holiday Inn stickies. I'll give you a pad. I'll give you a whole, like, you can have a ream of printer paper if you want.
Well, thanks, JT, Evan. Pleasure to be here. Marty, good to see you again. So just to fill in some of the information for myself, joined the Air Force 30-some years ago. Originally flew B-52s, and about halfway through my career, I transitioned into being an ALO, forward air controller with the Army. First tour was up at Fort Drum just prior to 9/11, and I'd later after several deployments, etc., I moved up to the Fort Bragg at the 14th ASOS there, and became the DO and then the commander. That's where I met JT. So on my original deployment, as fate would have it, 9/11 occurred, and I deployed to Afghanistan, and the way I put it, I kind of Forrest Gump my way through Afghanistan until Operation Anaconda. I was the lead air planner and ALO for Anaconda. It was the first conventional fight in the GWAT, and a lot of exciting stuff happened there. So I figured at some point in my life I'd write a book. So I wrote all the stuff down in your typical green notebook. I dug those out over the years, dusted them off, and I started writing. It took a long time. I think it took me a cumulative of probably about 12 years to finish the book. And then talking to JT, we maintained our relationship. He went on to, I'll say, bigger and better things. And I moved on to other things myself. But he became aware that I was writing this book. I sent him a draft. He enjoyed it, at least he said so. And then I shared with him that as a veteran, and I kind of took this across probably many folks had a similar experience. There was no interest in first-time veteran author nonfiction or fiction. It wasn't a genre that they were interested. It wasn't teenage zombie vampires or anything like that. So frustrated, put out a lot of submission letters, and JT and I got to talking, and that's where I think he came up with the idea of putting together a publishing company under the banner of the consortium of veteran ventures that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, it was seeing what Marty and Leo were doing at the time, because I know you had a horrible experience, Marty, with a real publisher, and that we had talked about this, what if there was another way? And it seemed like, all the assets are there now in this time frame. Like, you don't have to have a major publisher or label or printing press or anything. Like, you have these services that are print on demand. So if you can obtain a finished product and you have some sort of a marketing arm, you're able to push your own stuff and maintain ownership.
Yeah, and ultimately people don't give a shit what the label is that did this. Like, they care about the story. Like, you either have a good story to tell or you don't. And I think that we all know that there's a lot of really great and compelling stories that are coming out of the veteran community or could come out of the veteran community, and it kind of feels like those are going underutilized or under.
Yeah, and also too, we saw the big names in the veteran in the veteran world. Your Marcus Luttrell's, your the guys that were part of the Bin Laden deal. Like, it's like these large publishers will snake those stories, kind of flash burn the audience with them, and then that's it. That's if those guys didn't negotiate a good deal in the beginning to maintain movie rights or to at least get a good split, like. That's their one story, and it's gone now. Like, and the publisher made off with the money, whereas our focus was giving the guys that had these cool stories more ownership in it. So yeah, you got a funny story, I think, that's part of your book. Your run-in with Mattis. Tell Evan about that.
Oh yeah. Well, I at the last minute I decided to change the names, but it's not hard to figure out who's who, and. So my boss, a colonel at the time, sent me into Camp Rhino. They had just had the fratricide with the B-52, and as an ALO with previous experience, he said, well, that's where you need to be. So I flew into Camp Rhino. The first night, tried to get in, and we were on a EC-130, and it took, I think it was 4 SAM shots, and eventually the pilot decided, that he'd had enough. So we turned around and went home. And but I still had those orders, so I got back on the next one. And so in a sense, not me personally, but kind of fighting our way in to land there. So I get on the ground. I walk through the what I viewed as the TOC at the time, carrying all my crap, the gas mask and all that stuff, 2 A bags worth of shit in the moonscape of that powder. And I got into the TOC. I looked and I see a general. So I'd never met or knew of General Mattis before. So I figured, well, he's the guy. So I went in there and I started to raise my hand to salute him. And he said, who the fuck are you, and what the fuck are you doing on my base? And I tried to explain to him who I was and why I was there, and he said, I don't need another shitter and eater. And he personally grabbed my stuff. He got his aide to grab one of my bags, and he walked me to the end of the runway. And he got to the CCT guys and said, you're out on the next plane. Make sure he gets on it. So he turned around. He walked back to the war, and of course, I couldn't leave. So I E&E'd around and eventually linked up with an ODA, and then I took it from there.
I don't need another shitter and eater.
Wow. It sounds like a great guy.
Well, I mean, you showed him now. Yeah, where's he at? Oh,
wait.
Whoops.
Wait. I don't need another shitter and eater. God, that's a man after my heart right there.
So yeah, from the 14th, where'd you go from there until retirement, and then when did this project really pick up?
Well, commanded the 14th, deployed a couple times to Iraq with the 82nd, and then I moved up to the ASOG. I was a deputy there, and then I took over command of the group. I became the Corps ALO, deployed with the 18th Airborne Corps a couple times. From there, I went to ACC and was the deputy IG. Then he got fired, and I became the IG, and I retired out of...
What did he get fired for?
Inappropriate communication.
That
awesome.
Sounds PC.
Yeah.
Those dick pics, they'll get you.
Yeah.
when I was retiring, though, that's when I kind of shifted gears and started focusing more on the book. And, we talked, we set it up, and I had the draft ready to go, and we started figuring out how to be a publishing company. Then you hooked me up with Marty, and what he had was something that I always was looking at myself, and I read the book and became very passionate about the whole goal of the company being just like that, capture veteran stories, and I will allude to for There I Was, two inspirational people in my life that really solidified what the company is supposed to be about, and that's what we all talked about already, which is capture vet stories before they're lost. And I'll just touch on that real quick. Is a good friend of mine, new friend, he's 96. I'll just call him Joe. He was a Marine in World War II, and he hit 4 beaches in 13 months, including Iwo Jima. And his best friend, who he enlisted with, died next to him on the beach at Iwo Jima. So he comes back and lives his life, and I meet him in a veteran writing class, and he has this big binder full of stuff. It's like his life and his experience in the military, etc. But he wants to write a book, but he just can't put it together. And so I helped him as much as I could. I digitized the stuff, and I was helping him down that road. But then I said, all I want in return for my helping you is tell me the story again, or tell me the story. And he said, I'm done. I'm not telling that story anymore. So he had worn himself out telling that story over most of that 96 years. So in a sense, it's lost. So that's where I came up with the There I Was story, backed up by my uncle, had never told us anything about his experience in World War II. And he had, one day, he told us all this fantastic story of personal heroism. He was with Patton. He covered an advance because the Germans were starting to come around behind. Long story short, he did some amazing things, but he never told us about it. He wrote a book. He tried to get it published, got frustrated, and at the end of his life, he threw it in a barrel and lit it on fire. So it was lost forever, except for that one story he told us. So looking at how Marty captured his experience and the history of the 75th Ranger Regiment in GWAT, we wanted Marty to come on with us. And we need a book. We needed a book like Marty's as almost like our keystone for the success, that we could start generating sales and bring in other authors and give other authors opportunities. So you hooked me up with Marty. Marty and I talked, and we signed Marty shortly before we went live with the company.
So let's talk about what it takes to do this. Like, where's the process here? So you have a rough draft manuscript that's hundreds of pages that some people have been working on for years of their life.
Yeah, I mean that's an endeavor in itself just to get to that rough draft. I'm ready to submit it to an editor or somebody to look at.
So rewind back a little bit then, and let's talk about the discipline to even get that rough draft. What kind of paths do you guys follow to really to knock pages down? What kind of habits?
I mean, and you guys know, we all work in kind of a creative space, doing what we do, and it's ultimately about sitting down and knowing that the first thing that you do probably is going to suck, and the second thing is probably going to suck too, and you don't really know how many things that you're going to put out that suck before you get to that one where you're like, man, this is feeling good, this is feeling like it's there. And ultimately every day you have to sit down, and when it comes to writing, you have to write. There's no other way to get around it. You have to sit down and write, and then you have to go back and realize that, hey, what you put down that first time is not going to be good. You got to look at it again the next day or the week after and say, like, okay, yeah, that's not working. For me, reading what I write out loud helps a lot, because a lot of people write stuff that just doesn't flow very well. In my opinion, it just doesn't read very well. And that's ultimately, like, if you can read it out loud, that helps a lot. And you go through months and months and months of that. And when it comes to writing these military stories, you kind of have that nagging thing in the back of your head of, what are the guys from my unit going to think about this?
Right.
Am I doing justice to them? Am I taking enough of the ego out of this? Am I does this live up to the standard that like they deserve a high standard of writing because of the experiences they went through, you know? Yeah, so, you know, getting to that rough draft point and getting to that point where you're like, okay, I feel good about this, and you start bringing the editors in, and then you go.
So what's the first editor that goes through? What is that called?
Usually the story editor.
Your wife?
My wife doesn't read my stuff, so
Okay.
she hears me talk about it. So by the time, like, that's with any of my stuff, like any of the film stuff I've worked on or any of that, she's like, well, I've already heard you talk about it so many times that, like, it just isn't, I can't tell if it's good at this point. So she's no help. Sorry, Lauren. I love you to death, but, like, not
no help.
So
yeah.
Story editor is first. So you have the rough draft. It goes to a story editor. What does a story editor do?
Make sure your story doesn't suck. You know, there's a structure to this stuff,
right.
You know? Like a book's really no different than a movie or something. Like you got 3 acts, you know? You got a beginning, a middle, and end, and does this make sense? And are you doing it?
Is it confusing? Stuff like that.
Can the reader follow along with what you're saying? Do you need to, you know, especially with these military books, it's a lot of, hey, you're using too many acronyms here, or you need to introduce this idea first before you can go down the rabbit hole with it, you know?
How does a story editor communicate with you after they're done with like the first pass? Do they come back with just their notes, or are they like in the weeds of the edit, like moving things around?
Yeah.
Or do they just come back and say, hey, you know, chapters 6 and 8, they need to be moved somewhere else because they're, you know, non sequitur and it doesn't flow right? Like, how does that work?
So I kind of, you know, and I don't know what your process is like, Pete, but like to me, I kind of break it down to there's like the strategic level edits and then there's the tactical level edits. The strategic level edits are, hey, you need to move this chapter around, or this chapter isn't working, I think we need to cut it. The tactical level edits are, hey, this paragraph needs to be switched around, or you need to elaborate more here in this area. And a lot of that is done via, I think the strategic level stuff is done phone call, emails, you know, stuff like that. But the tactical level stuff is like you've got this Word document or a Google Docs where like you got the comments turned on and they're putting their comments right into the document so that you can see, okay, this is where I need to work on stuff, or this is good, do more of this, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I just agree.
From the business side, you know, since we're trying to make money, we are looking at a weeding process. It's very difficult to tell a veteran who has poured his heart out into a story that we're not going to publish you. It's happened, but it's rare. What we try to do is provide them editorial services to make it better. So what we do is like if Evan, I said, hey, do you like to read books? And you say, yeah, I love to read military nonfiction. Okay, I got something I'd like you to look at. I call that a beta read. So you read it, I get 2 other guys or gals to read it, and then they give me a coffee shop book review and tell me, what'd you think? Did you like it? Was it entertaining? Did it flow right? You know, all the big picture stuff. And if they like it, then we're going to proceed. If they're like, oh my God, this is too rough, then that's the first input to the author is it's rough. Try again. You know, get somebody you care about to, but not that's going to blow smoke. It's somebody that you can trust to give you honest feedback. And then we go through that strategic tactical process and work with the author, which is sometimes difficult because everybody is very proud of what they've done. Some are more open than others, so you know that's the good and the bad.
You know, ultimately too, like as far as like if you're a writer that is working on writing your story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction about your experiences or somebody else, and you know you're upset that you didn't get the feedback that you wanted or a publisher turned down, if you haven't actually studied the craft of writing at that point yet and figured out like you know, do you know the difference between an active and passive voice? You know, do you understand act structures and you know,
keep flopping that.
Yeah, you know, like there's just like if you haven't learned the 101 stuff yet, then you know, skipping ahead to submitting to a publisher might be rushing things a little bit. You know, and there's a lot of, I'm sure you've ran into it where there's a lot of authors where they are so excited about their story, which may very well be very compelling, but they skipped right across the actual craft of putting words to paper, you know, and that's a really important aspect in my opinion.
I could see that happening a lot. I could see you know, taking a journal and then just saying, I'm amazing. You know what? I'm just gonna submit this. This is great. This is great shit. My wife thinks it's awesome too. I could see that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's with everything. That's with people that have movie ideas, people that have video. I mean, down to the basic video ideas. Guys that approach us with video ideas, and the first sentence out of their mouth is, "Well, it takes place in space," and it's like, well, do you know? I don't have a space set. Like, money. That just got expensive. Well,
and that's what people don't realize is like look, like, you know, like Jared, like I love your story, not to like deviate too much here, but I love your story. It's like, man, you've been doing video since you were in high school. It's not like you just woke up one day and started Article 15 and started just crushing YouTube. Like, there's time that went into that. Like, Evan, you've been making fucking coffee since like
2007.
Yeah. Like, this stuff just doesn't happen over. It's the same with writing. Like, you're not going to write a best-selling book the first time you sit down to write something.
God, that'd be sick, though.
I mean, it'd be
impressive. Did you do
it? No. I mean, my first... I can show you the first stuff that I wrote.
I'd love to see it.
So after story, then what is the process there? Once your story editor comes back and you kind of fix the story to where that they and these people that are story editors, like, are these degree holding literature people? Like, what kind of people that are?
I mean, I think if you're looking at the bigger publishers, they probably are.
Yeah.
You know, people that have like masters in English and you know, creative writing and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I think, you know, after you get to that point, though, it's then a lot of things start happening at once. There's a lot of simultaneous stuff because now you have to start like, what's our marketing strategy with this? Let's start going through and actually correcting the copy and making sure all the commas are where they need to be. The DAs are.
So that's the copy editor. That's after story editor.
Yeah, usually you don't. I mean, there's no point in messing around with grammar until you got the story right.
Yeah.
You know, so they usually come in. That's where you start talking marketing, start talking about cover art. There's just like, you know, if you're writing a military book, start talking about like getting it submitted to the right
process.
Yep. You know, you start getting to that point where like, okay, this is happening. We got something here. Now a lot of stuff needs to start moving and shaking. You know, and Pete can kind of talk about. Oh man, this is why I love coming on the podcast. It's just like in studio masseuse and
all of it.
Yeah.
So
it's the full experience.
So from the copy editor, where are we at with the process?
Well, that's when we go back to the author, go through pretty much a line by line, making sure we're not compromising anything that really is important to the author. So we work through that. At the same time, actually, while we're doing it, but then the next stage would be formatting, putting it into a really nice looking format, and then we move to the cover. The cover design is very important. Covers sell books.
Yep.
And these days, you got to worry about what's it look like as a thumbnail on Amazon, in addition to what's it look like on a shelf.
Yeah.
You know, those are two very different things to take into consideration marketing-wise.
And then we also decide what media are we going to address with the book. Is it just going to be print? Is it going to be hardcover, softcover, digital? We're actually going to digital. We're going to come out with our first audio book in the next few months. So all of those things require different efforts.
Which title is that for the audiobook?
Zoticus. It's a steampunk novel, very well written.
Yeah.
We're hoping early fall
Nice.
It'll be out. And we have I wish I meant to write it down, but the gentleman who does the audiobooks is fantastic. He's
local
done,
to where you're at now? Or is it?
No, he's I'm not exactly sure where he's out of, but he has done many audiobooks. He has a contract with Audible. And he sounds like he ought to be previewing movies in the theater.
Good reader.
Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah.
Got that sultry voice.
Yeah, I know.
Pulls him right in.
So, is that a whole? Let's talk about the audio side, because that's another thing I've heard people have been screwed out of in the contracting phase of when you go to a publisher to sell your book is giving them too much of the audio piece, and that's where a lot of this is going now.
Yeah, with my first book with the larger publisher, there wasn't an audio version, so I think they held those rights, but they never did the audio version for it. This one, with Violence of Action, since I was controlling that, we worked through a company called Tantor, who does a lot of the big audiobooks for a lot of the big publishers, and they did a pretty good job with it, and we were pretty happy with it. of course we don't 100% control it now. We were talking about earlier, now there's options where you can control 100% of what you're bringing in on that and the production and everything that just I don't think were really available a couple years ago when we first did this. So the game is, the publishing game is this, continually evolving thing, especially on the audio and digital fronts, I think, as technology and platforms evolve.
Well, let's back up a little bit too. So you're a military guy out there that thinks, either has or thinks you have a cool story. Both of you have gone through the process of getting the DoD to bless off on your books. I want to hear from each of you what that experience was like, what to expect if you're going to submit something, timelines, what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was kind of a new experience, and I kind of fumbled my way through it to a certain degree. I was kind of trying to just figure stuff out as I went and dealing with PAOs and that sort of thing. And I think, my best advice to a lot of people is, one, don't skip that. Do the right thing. Like, go get it blessed off on. Like, build that into your publishing timeline.
There's a few authors in the last year that have had all
the
money taken away.
Yeah,
because they didn't do it.
Yeah, and it's just, just do the right thing. If you have a story that conflicts with an NDA that you signed or something, they're not going to tell you that you can't write your story. They're just going to ask to be a part of that process and make sure that their stuff that they need protected is protected, And if you're a writer worthy of the title, you can work around that guidance. You can.
Yeah. And going through that myself, I learned a lot. My first book, Off We Go, had a lot to be redacted. So I would not have caught that reviewing other folks' books. So I got that feedback. Process took, for that first book, it took 6 months, and it goes through the departments. So if you're, like in Marty's case, the Army. So it goes to the DOD, Department of the Army, review.
You, especially Special Operations Command, there.
Yeah, they go to all those different entities have to bless off on it. All the way down to the unit level.
That just seems labor intensive. Like, are there people that are just reading books and saying yes or no?
Yeah. Which, how do I get that job in the Army? Like,
that's kind of a cool job.
Do they have that for video games too, or?
So yeah, continue.
Just that, as Marty said, you got to do the right thing. If you do that as the author, you save that period of time when you do a submission. You can actually submit a book that says, hey, this has been through the process. Now, the problem with that is if there's substantial edits and changes, it may have to go for a second review, but that'll be much shorter than the first.
Yeah.
And I think if you are somebody who has been proactive about it, like for me, I was staying in contact with the PAOs as we were putting the book together and bouncing stuff off of them as we went, so to avoid having to do this complete revision once we submitted it. I was hoping that it would just be minor tweaks and edits, and that's ultimately what it ended up being. And I think the biggest discussion that we had was over the pictures that we used.
Good.
Because I was really proactive with it, and I think that helps. But if you're somebody that just writes the entire thing out, gets way further down the road of in the publishing process, submits it, and they come back and say, "Hey, man."
You can't even tell some of these stories.
Yeah, then you're kind of like, well, shit, I just spent all this time and effort writing, and just better to be proactive right up front. And it's okay to push back a little bit too. Like, we had a little bit of back and forth on the pictures that went into Violence of Action, and I think as long as you're reasonable and not a complete jerk about it, like,
and reasoning too. Hey,
they'll work with you. You know. I think you just got to use those people skills, which writers aren't really known for having, but they help to have,
So, bam, we're through the approval. DOD said yes. Copy's done. Art department is done. Where does it go from there?
I mean, at that point, you're pretty much at those final stages of, talking to your distributors and getting it on the, in the case of with A15 Publishing, smaller independent, outfit, it's like, okay, what platforms can we get these on? Where do we need to have them uploaded? All that sort of stuff. I think a bigger publisher, they already have those existing relationships. That makes it a little bit easier. But overall, it's, you're figuring out where's this thing going to go and hopefully finalizing cover art and stuff like that.
Do you guys have any data on what it's looking like now for physical sales rather to digital. You know, are bookstores still a thing? You know, how's Barnes and Noble's doing stuff like that? Like is airports probably the number one as far as physical sales? Like, what do you guys know about that?
So, you know, let me know what you've seen. But for me, what I've seen is about 70 to 30, 70% ebook downloads to about 30% physical covers. The thing that you have to take into account, though, when you're, especially if you're doing this independently, is, you know, so getting on these different bestseller lists gives you a lot of credibility as a writer. It helps with future book deals, things like that. So if you're looking at, like, I want to get on the USA Today list or the New York Times list or something like that, those lists actually weight the physical, you know, brick and mortar sales over the ebook downloads, which sucks in my opinion, because ultimately it's
a buy's a buy.
Do we know why? Is it just like a residual holdover from historical sales data?
I think there's still a lot of resistance to change in the publishing.
It seems crazy to me, but hey,
well,
whatever.
I mean, the music industry saw it. I mean, how long did the music industry fight iTunes?
Yep.
Until they finally accepted it, and then they saw it, the turnaround once they started playing ball. Like, I'm sure it's the same thing with these old school guys that have had these printing presses for 100 years. Some of them have been around.
Yeah, I mean, the big five publishers are very well established. Like, these are the same guys that were putting out Hemingway shit, you know, like
since the late 1800s, pretty much.
Who's the big five? Do we
Simon and Schuster,
right.
Penguin.
Yeah. Random? Is that
Random, probably.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to have these memorized.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No.
I was interested in figuring out, like, okay.
Yeah, let's talk about the market, like the book market here.
Yeah.
Well, let me just add a comment about the that topic of the e versus physical book. And I think what we've seen as I don't want to put a label on us, but we're small, and we have a very targeted audience. That the way I see it playing out is the first few books, or meaning, you know, many books, but the first wave of books are almost all physical books, and I think that's the circle of fan base. You know, like family members. Associates, Facebook friends, they want something in their hand with their friend or family member's name on it. As time goes on, then the scope expands to include the people outside of that ring, and I think those people are more inclined to buy the e-version. So first out the gate, it's almost exclusively physical books, and then as time goes on, then the scale starts to tip the other way.
Well, so any news on the forefront of some of these physical places going out of business? Didn't Books A Million go out of business?
Yeah, I believe so.
2 years ago, was it?
Yeah.
So Barnes and Noble is pretty much the only one left.
You know, Barnes and Noble is the really big one. Obviously, there's still the airport bookstores, which I don't know what the numbers are on that market, but I believe, I mean, go to an airport. It must be working for them. You know, people buy books at airports.
That's what I kind of think now is, like, airports have to be one of the largest distributors of physical books at this point, other than, you know, if you're excluding e-commerce.
Yeah, and, you know, look, even if you're selling these books online, like over Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com and stuff, there's always going to be a market for the physical book. I think for a while there's this discussion about whether the physical book would stick around for the long term or not. It's always going to be there. People always...
The fans, they like to collect.
Well, it still accounts for what? Above 60% of all book sales are still physical books. Is like a data point I read a few days ago. So it's not like it's, you know, it's definitely encroached in the last decade for sure, but I mean 60%.
Well, hey, you went from 100% of sales being physical books.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a huge shift in the market there, you know. So I think the publishing industry, though, is starting to kind of wrap their heads around this new market, and things have kind of settled out now that we, you know, the Nooks and the Kindles and all that are out there. They kind of see how that affects the market, and I think they're finally starting to get comfortable in what this new landscape looks like. Whereas like 5 years ago, it was like, who knows if we'll have a job?
Is there a content grab with these big five publishers or in the publishing industry in general? Like, are they actively seeking for the good stories, or are they just waiting until these things are sent to them and put on their desk and then telling people yes or no? Because it's like, you look at you look at the digital space now in the movie industry where Netflix and Sony and Amazon and now Apple, who just came out last week and said they're going to dump $1 billion into original content. So you have all these big brands that are essentially publishers of video content for streaming and stuff like that, and they're pulling it all in, and they're giving deals, and it's just like a big thing. Do you see that in the publishing world? Is there a season for books to be shopped?
So I think that part of the publishing industry hasn't changed that much. There's always been competition for the big names, for the celebrities that put out their books and stuff. Like, hey, look, we could probably talk to Chris Peranto. I'm sure his book agent probably had multiple offers on the 13 Hours story. You look at the books of different, if you're like I don't know.
The Obamas are doing a book right now.
Yeah,
right?
I'm sure Hillary Clinton just put a book out. I'm sure she had everybody bidding on her story, and I believe she sold it for she got like a $25 million advance on that, which is like Marty Skovlund's not getting that anytime soon. So I think there's always that competition for the.
It's like $1 million per person that just had an accidental suicide around the family. It's just a joke.
I don't think we can say that out loud.
I think we can.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Whoever put the barrel at the back of their head to blow their head off, it's like had accidental falls down waterfalls and things, It's an accident-prone family, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
is there a season at all though?
I don't think there's a season, because you got to keep it going throughout the year. You got to constantly be releasing books, and just like if you look at like one of the big studios. They have to have that steady slate of, of course they try to stack like the big tentpole ones in the summertime and like the Oscar bait in the wintertime. But they have to have that continuous stream of content coming out. And I think, I haven't worked for a big publisher before. And, Pete, let me know, what you think. But like, it seems like the focus on is we got to have a continuous stream of books coming out. And depending on what the topic of that book is, we'll maybe try to schedule that at, Veterans Day and Memorial Day are probably big dates for A15 publishing,
Yeah, and
that makes sense.
Like I said before, I think there's a genre focus too. If something comes out and it seems popular, again, the resurgence of vampire stuff. Everybody had vampire books coming out because they knew they could tap that market. So for us, we have... just to be clear, it's actually, I should really make this point, is that we don't restrict genre. It's the key factor for us publishing is that the author is a veteran or a family member of a veteran. So they can write whatever they want. But like you, I have not worked for the big house, and I'm not, I don't want to actually learn too much about it because I want us to be what we are, and we serve a different purpose. So. But it's good data to have, as far as marketing is concerned.
And just awareness of what the general landscape looks like.
Yeah.
So we have Off We Go as a title that you did, Pete, and that one is like it's fiction but nonfiction, about it was a thing. You change names and kind of situations and stuff like that to carry the story of essentially going into Operation Anaconda. But There I Was is super interesting. Let's talk about that. How many people did you get together for this one? And what's our war range or date range of it? And how many volumes do you plan on doing?
Very proud of that one. We had 20 veterans stories included. A couple were not living. Those stories were passed down through, spoken word and noted by family members. But 20 across all services and from World War I till the present day. And as you know, you're in it. Marty's in it. And we have a very solid representation for Vietnam vets. It was very important to us to have that representation. Korea, Vietnam, World War II, World War I, Panama, Grenada, and the GWAT. Stories range from funny, yours, to very sobering and serious. And what is a little bit unique about the book is it is really a written version of the spoken story. I wrote it as it was told to me. Every word,
And there was a prerequisite. You had to be drinking, right?
That's right. For those who, Joe, the 96-year-old, he was drinking, but he had a cup of coffee.
Okay.
That's right. I have met you, and I thought today was the first time I'd met you in person.
Yeah, I was wondering. You said, "Hey, nice to meet you for the first time." I have a superpower. It's forgettability.
Yeah. We'll always have the pool in D.C.
That's right.
Yeah. So, if you are a military history fan at all or anything, There I Was is super interesting because it's super raw of just multiple people that were in wars from Korea to Vietnam to Joe in World War II, like that just sit down and tell a story that ranges from 3 to 10 pages, right? And it's just
And the intent is not to limit the number of volumes. Have several folks lined up. I got 2 interviews with World War II vets for Volume 2. Obviously want to keep including...
he's next.
Yep. Evan Rocco said he'll do it. Mary.
Mary would be great.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so if we can get just about that, 20 folks, I think that makes a nice sized book and a great range of stories.
Right.
All right, so now let's shift gears over to the current project. What's going on with Violence of Action?
So a little bit of background on it, I guess. We put out Violence of Action back when we had Blackside Publishing. Kind of the so it's been out for a couple of years now in a hardcover version, and kind of the motivation for that was, so last couple of years I was in the military, I was a recruiter, and being a recruiter, you're out there, you're embedded in the community, so to speak, and I really found out how disconnected, and this is in like central New York, kind of a rural area. So there weren't people that were like, it's not like I was a recruiter on Berkeley. People weren't like openly hostile, but you really got a sense of how disconnected the average everyday American is with their military, know? And that really was shoved in my face as a recruiter quite a bit. Like it was very, very apparent to me. And, as I went on, I started thinking like, okay, where I came from, the 75th Ranger Regiment, like there's history that needs to be told there. The only reason... the unit's big on history. Like the only reason we know about Darby's Rangers is because somebody wrote down something about Darby's Rangers. The only reason we know about these guys that were doing LRT patrols in Vietnam is because those guys sat down and write their stories down. This is how we record history, and there just wasn't a lot out there about the GWAT. And the organization itself is hyper OPSEC sensitive. Like we're known for it within this, and so ultimately, I'd been thinking about like, okay, something needs to be written about that, and I didn't know what, and it didn't really get clarified until I'd moved out to Colorado, and I met with a Gold Star mother named Scotty Domey, and her son, Sergeant First Class Christopher Domey, was killed on his 14th deployment.
Mm-hmm. He was a Ranger JTAC.
Yes, and sitting down and talking with her, she was asking me questions like, "What does this badge mean?" Like pointing to, like his combat action badge and things like that, and so what exactly is a 13 Fox or a JTAC? Like these like really basic ground questions that you would just think a mother would know. It's one thing if you were in the military for like 2 years and your mom doesn't know what a 13 Fox is, but if that was your life's work, you would think she like, okay, I'm the guy that calls in the bombs, like she didn't know that. I was like, man, there's like something needs to be done about this. And so that's kind of where we hatched this plan of we would try to cover the first 10 years of following 9/11 from the 75th Ranger Regiment's perspective, and we got about close to 40 guys involved in that, including support guys, a Ranger wife, a Ranger Gold Star mother, and then a good sampling of all the different MOSs that make up the regiment. We've got the JTAC, we've got the medic, we've got the line guy, that sort of stuff, and most of them are very serious, but we made sure we put 2 kind of comic relief stories in there. And put this thing together and put it out back in 2014, I think it was, that it first came out, and it's kind of been out there, and it was I think it was a successful book, and we've gotten a lot of really good feedback on it, and a little bit of criticism too. There was a little bit of criticism, but largely very, very good feedback on it. And now with A15 standing up, and I think they've got a really important mission that they're doing, and continuing what we originally thought Blackside Publishing would do. and it seems like a really good fit for it to come out in paperback version now. And a paperback is overdue at this point. We need to get it out at a more reasonable price point. The hardcover was expensive. We needed to make it a little bit more accessible, and as well as, hey, you like, just personally, I think I'm a better writer now than I was, 3-4 years ago. And
did you open that one up and go through it?
Yeah, and Pete also brought in a really great editor that brought additional insight. And
the re-release is essentially a new book.
The same stories, but tightened up. I would say it's been tightened up. It's an improvement, I think. Not that the first one was bad, but it's an improvement, and I think that's a good thing. The second edition is good, and we've updated some of the numbers and some of the facts in there that have changed. Hey, we're still fighting the same fucking war that
right.
This was written about. So things have things needed updating. So, and that's where we're at now, is putting out this paperback. It's got a new cover, and it's going to continue to be this beacon of history for what the 75th Ranger Regiment did and what its members did, and not one man's story, but the unit's story.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Do you have anything else? Any other questions?
No, I do not.
All right. Well, so Violence of Action. Off we go. There I was. That's the one I definitely think our audience is really going to enjoy. There I was. A collection of different generations coming together to just tell, one of their crazy stories with it that I'm sure they all have many. So for Pete Donnelly, Marty Skovlund, Evan Hafer, JT, this is Blackhearted.
BlackRifle Coffee Company, along with Arson Wave, would like to thank you for tuning in to Blackhearted. Have a